Justice Center Funding Workshop. It's a special meeting. It's November 14th, 2023. The time is 11 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Matari, Brooks, and Duncan. Are there changes to the agenda? All right, and public comment. Okay, hearing none, we'll go for funding options for Justice Center expansion. And I think that Jody has some updates. You want to turn your microphone on?
I communicated to the board via email as well as discussed it with Brandy and Jennifer. The project, if we would agree that the project budget before you and the estimate could be used as a framework for how we would navigate through the cost of the project, that would be great. I understand that Brandy would need to, and she has said that she has completed reconciliation of the budget every time I send it. The idea here is just to provide the board with the expenditures and that the funding will believe to be the discussion today. I understand from the board in our last conversation that the hope was to take ARPA funds and then LATCF funds and burn those first, with the county fund being then burnt third. And so this discussion on the workshop will hopefully be able to cover that, as well as then sourcing the funding.
Okay. Brandy, did you want to?
Yeah, I think after last discussion, I don't remember what day the meeting was, for me, the outstanding items were determining if the board wanted to carry an additional layer of contingency, and if they do, if that will be funded with ARPA or county dollars, and then determining the funding for the Amendment 4 on that LCA contract. So if it was LATCF or ARPA, that was kind of the discussion we last had. And so those were my outstanding items to get addressed.
Okay.
They would be represented in the yellow on the budget sheet that you received under soft costs.
Okay. All right. So I'm thinking that we've all agreed. We want to spend ARPA first, LATCF second, and county fund third. So between your two spreadsheets, what changes do we have to make that happen?
I think on Jody's spreadsheet, under the soft cost section in the LATCF column, that 67,500 and the 80,000.
Okay.
Those added together are the $147,500 change to phase 2.
Yes.
I would ask that instead of being funded by LATCF, they would be moved over and funded by ARPA.
Okay.
So for me, that would be the first change, just to clarify that we're spending ARPA before dipping into the tribal money.
Yes.
And then going down further in her spreadsheet, that owner carried contingency amount, it's in red and it bold, it says recommended for contingency. If the board is okay carrying that amount in contingency, so that's an owner carried contingency for owner provided costs. So it's outside of the construction contingencies that are built into the Boughton contract, from my understanding. And this contingency, from what I'm told, would be to cover things like FF&E and soft costs. If you want to carry that contingency, I would prefer you fund it with fund balance, and I'd like that decision made today. And that would just be so that we're spending all of the ARPA and we're not using ARPA to fund a contingency pool. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Just the clarification, the contingency, if I heard correctly, is for owner carried contingency on the entire project, and that the FF&E is a separate line item. So I just wanted to make sure that there was two line items. One is FF&E and the other is contingency.
Right, so the contingency would be for anything.
Anything unforeseen.
Construction,
Okay.
soft costs, FF&E, just wherever a shortfall may come or.
It would be on
So
the
I
top.
think if you choose to, and I just got this updated spreadsheet before the meeting, so I haven't totally dived into reconciling every single line, but I believe that if you were to fund that contingency with fund balance, it would lower, Jody shows a amount with source TBD at the bottom, 11.6 million. I believe it would lower that amount by the contingency amount, because we would essentially be adding a revenue of county money for that contingency amount. Does that make sense? I still need to review it in detail, but I believe between our two spreadsheets, that is the difference.
Yeah, correct, but I mean, it's kind of potato, potato, because all of that has to be sourced, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you
I was
can-
just trying to
Yeah.
explain that it would go down by that contingency amount.
Sure, sure. And then, once again, I mean, we're talking contingency, but as long as everybody understands, it is our insurance policy. Essentially, it's the county's portion. Boughton has their own contingency in their construction. So, yep. All right, thoughts on the changes for moving funding? Did you want to keep owner-carried contingency?
Well, I'm just looking at, we've just gone up another $1 million, so I'm just trying to absorb that right now. You know, I guess my first question is, where is the end point with this? You know, where can we have numbers that we're confident aren't going to keep just ratcheting up? That's the first one. You know, I think as far as how we allocate the funds, we've already talked about that, so.
So the contingency line has been on the spreadsheet the entire time. So that number has been presented to the board and everyone as a required funding if the board so choose to keep the contingency. I did not add it in, but now I added it in, so then that way there can be a comprehensive understanding that that contingency needs to be funded.
Your microphone, just slide your slide up. There you go, thank you. Yeah. So the project has not increased in cost. What has happened is we are allocating or moving it to a different column, which, you know, it would have been nice to have it in the column since June, but that didn't happen. So here we're at, you know, here's where we're at. And once again, it's,
I mean, the issue is we're making decisions based upon the information we have that's constantly changing. You know, that's the hard part.
yes, and in construction projects, you will have aspects continually changing because of things like the line locate that we got. Let's see, we're additional conduit relocation. So that's going to be an added cost. So there's things that cannot be, it's impossible to account for every single thing. We do the best we can as far as financially forecasting what it needs to be done, but until you get into it, these are things that we don't
Okay.
know about, and that's what the contingency is for, is to cover those things that were unforeseen.
See, now, and I'm just going to bring this up just to, excuse me, just to cover this for a second, because I want to make my point that we keep making decisions on information that's constantly changing. And while I appreciate the fact that you cannot account for every possible thing, there is, and it has always been said, that there's been a cushion built into these numbers. But there never is enough cushion. That's why it keeps going up. I mean, we're at 39.8 million right now, okay? Now, things couldn't have been accounted for in March. And I'm going to ask this question again. I've asked 2 times before. Where did the $6 million, the 6 and 6 out of the 15 come from? Because that's what I made my decision on for this building, you know, and I've never gotten an answer to that.
Sure. Well, I can answer it right now.
That'd be great.
So at that particular meeting, we had the $6 million that was presented to ARPA for the jail project. So we didn't get the 7.6 million until a few weeks after that meeting. And the other,
6 million.
I just, because that was at a meeting, that was not the fund balance meeting that we had the week after that. That's when we got solid numbers from the finance auditor's department. And that's when we found out, we identified the 13 million plus some district court money that I watched the meeting again, and it brought us up to about 14. 14, or I'm sorry, 13 plus, it was additional 3 or 4, so that was about 16.
My point is that $6 million was all we had to take out of our fund balance to cover this project. That's how it was characterized. Now, the week before, we were given an estimate of 35 million, and that did not include the soft costs of 3.5 million additional. So 6 million from 35 million means 29 million left over. That's how this is being presented here. So, the reality is that you had this number, you knew this, you said this number to me, I said yes for this building, and then in June, it's known that it's 38.3 million, and, the board was never given that information at that point in time. It was never presented to the board.
And so we identified the breakdown in communication, and at that time, RMO was, under your liaison, and so also, we had already signed the contracts back in December, so.
I'm sorry, but this email has got you on it with 38.3 million, okay?
Okay.
So the liaison explanation, I don't buy that.
Well, and that's fine. We have rectified all of the communication difficulties, and, that's the email to the auditor. Which email is that one?
It's an email from RMO to the auditor with
Okay.
yourself on it.
Sure.
And that's where it says 38.3 million. And so, my only concern, look, we're in on this one. There's no going back, okay?
Right.
So the question is, how much more are we going to have to allocate? When are we going to hit our endpoint? And then actually the estimates start coming down, meaning that we overestimated. It's a constant underestimating.
December. That's when Work Package 3 will receive the bids for that, and then we'll have a better idea.
And that's the problem is, what confidence do I have with any of this information that comes before us? This is a meeting we should have had back in June, honestly, where we could talk about this. So I've kind of spoken my piece on it earlier. We spend the ARPA funds first. We spend the, was it the LTCA funds?
LATCF.
LATC funds next.
Yep.
And then, the rest of it's going to come out of, the county savings. And, I guess the question is, how much do we have to allocate towards that? And it sounds like, what, 10 million? 11.6 million we're going to allocate to it. Brandy's identified, what, about 9.5, 10 million of that so far?
Yeah, we're still about $837,000 short.
Does that include the 4.79? I didn't add it up right. The 4.6 from the interest.
Yeah, it's 5.5.
No, so the interest is that will be in the spring. So yes, that's not taking into account any fund balance you're going to build in FY '24. That's
Okay.
going off of FY '23 fund balances. So once we wrap up the audit and we're close to issuing financials in the spring, we'll come back to you and say, you have this much money left to reassign to capital projects. Interest specifically, we over collected on by over $5 million, so I'm hoping that will go a long way towards what we can dump into capital projects.
And replenish some of the other
That's what I'm
sources that
hoping.
you've identified.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping, but again, I have to add the caveat, as always, we have a lot of audit adjustments. We haven't even begun our audit yet, so a lot of adjustments forthcoming.
So during that process, is it the outside auditor that makes the adjustments, or you make the adjustments to get ready for the audit?
So first of all, we have to wait over a month for all of our revenues for FY '23 to finish arriving. So we don't even get all of our FY '23 revenues until November. So we can't even give an accurate picture of how much money we made until November. And then we have to go through and adjust every single grant in the county. And I'm working on the budget book right now, so I can tell you off the top of my head, we have over 100,000 journal entries our office does every year. So it is a lot that happens. So we have to roll forward all the unused grant revenues, which means we have to wait for all the departments to get all their grant expenses in, and they take a long time to do that, and they all make mistakes, and we have to go back and fix them. So that's just the revenue and expense piece. And so once we have all of that done, which isn't until after Thanksgiving, so we're approaching that point, then the auditors come in, they do all their work, and if they see anything wrong, we have to go fix it. And there are certain things that we have to wait to book anyways, like some health insurance stuff. We don't have that until December. We don't have the fair and the KCMS stuff until December, January. So we just wait on a lot of data to come into us.
Sure. No,
Yeah.
I get it. All right, well, And once again, it's contingency. We hope to not have to use it, and we'll see. All indications so far from Boughton is that we will be under that number. And so just got to wait till all this stuff comes in. But also, should things come in over budget, there are more cuts we can make. So right now, we're trying to cut things that we do not need, but there are other cuts that we can even go deeper if we have to, if things don't come back favorable in December. So we're trying to keep all the contingency intact right now, but it does not necessarily mean that it's going to be spent or that, we can continue to make cuts. So, any questions, Bill?
No, I'm pretty much where Bruce is coming from. I keep hearing, we're done adding money, and it keeps going up. And I think we're gonna end up just south of 60 million before it's over.
Well, we'll know in about a month in December when the bid packages come back.
So for now, is the board okay just clarifying the funding for LCA Amendment 4 is ARPA? That would be consistent with how that contract was written. And then we can use county funds for the contingency amount?
I'm fine with that. Bruce?
Conceptually, yeah. I mean, do we have the money to assign?
We do, right now. We have, after taking away the money that we've dedicated for jail pods and Casey North, we still have $3 million left in Fund 11. So I would pull from that. I would just set aside the contingency dollar amount to not be touched. And then when we do our fund balance resolution in the spring, hopefully we'll have a lot more clarity after work package 3 comes in. Still, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And then I would just add that if the board could agree that the project estimate that we have here, Brandy would be willing to reconcile all the numbers to make sure that there's the checks and balances. And then as we're doing the burn through ARPA and then LATCF, that we're monitoring that burn rate and know when we get to the county funds. And that would be the only request that I would have if she would be agreeable.
I'm just curious, how come this contingency was not included before?
It was included, it just wasn't added in, so it was on the spreadsheet, and so every spreadsheet that you received had the contingency as a placeholder, and then when I was reconciling the numbers, I added it in as a cost, so now it's a county cost. That is why. It's there, it was always there, it just wasn't in a way that I added it together. So it was, if you look at every other spreadsheet you've received, you'll see that contingency, that line was there. It needed to be funded, and I think we are talking now about county funds. So.
Well, then, where's the $1 million? It was 38.8 before, now it's 39.8.
Right, it's the contingency of the 1,027,000 is now been added to the total, because that's the contingency that was on the spreadsheet. And if you look, it wasn't in a cost column, it was it was shown as a line item, and it needed to be in a cost column. So
I
that,
think, Jody, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think they have had that contingency dollar amount, but they were never adding it into the total. Does that make sense? So it was displayed, but it was not being calculated into the total.
Error. Because it's always been here since June, but it wasn't in that column.
I think that's
this
why
in
it's so
this number?
important to do checks and
Yes.
balances, that's all.
Is there anything else that is not correct on this? Because quite frankly, the board looks at the bottom line numbers. I mean, and so when numbers are in a spreadsheet, but they're not incorporated in the bottom line,
Yes.
to me, they're not in the spreadsheet.
Well, I understand, and that's why I would say that it would be wonderful if we could have checks and balances, and I would look forward to the auditor's office reconciling that to make sure that there's double checks. So then that way, if there's a number that needs to be accounted for, or if there is an error, or if there's anything, it would be nice just to have a checks and balance. That's all I'm asking for. Because up till this point, the budget hasn't been looked at as being the budget, and so I would appreciate, and that's why I asked, if it would be looked at as a budget sheet. And then again, I left a voicemail for you to indicate that the contingency was in the placeholder, but it wasn't a cost, and I communicated that to you on my voicemail. And before
And-
this meeting,
When I was in another meeting.
no, right, before this meeting, then I spoke to you before you went
Yes.
upstairs. And again, I realized it was something that I had identified when I was reconciling the sheet, and so therefore it was presented to you in the auditor's
Yeah,
office.
the point of contention here is the fact that these spreadsheets were never being sent to me until after raising a big stink about this in public meetings in October.
Yes.
And then they're getting sent to me, and it turns out they're not accurate
Well,
on the bottom line.
Well, they're representative, and you're correct.
Okay,
I've
and so-
reconciled that now, and I've communicated that to you, and so
And
therefore.
who made these spreadsheets?
It was a spreadsheet from the RMO, and we sent it to everyone for them to review and to comment on. And that was on a weekly basis, and everyone has received it from the time that you had asked.
So RMO made them, made the spreadsheet.
Well, it was based on the information that was provided for the project cost, yes. And it was necessary for the auditor's office to understand the project cost as well. I mean, it wasn't just made in isolation. It was provided to us by the Boughton expenditures. It was provided to us by the LCA and the soft cost. So it wasn't RMO coming up with the numbers. It was RMO tracking the numbers and representing them in a spreadsheet for the purposes of understanding the running total.
Yeah,
That was the intent of what our office did.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Public comment? Is it?
All right. Hello again, my name's Ron Hartman. I got a few comments about what we've done here. First, I'd like you to consider the fact that you can't turn back. I'm not saying you should turn back, but I would not want you to take it off the table. I'll give you an example of my own personal one. The house I built here in Coeur d'Alene, I started with a particular architect and a builder. We had plans and things were going south, kind of like you guys are talking right here. I fired him. I paid a cancellation cost, went over to the architect, got the drawings, and rebid the house. Now, did it delay it a little bit? Yes. Did it cost me a cancellation cost? Yes. Did I come out ahead in the end? Yes. I think you need to look at that. This is way out of control. The other one, I think you need to approve a fixed number. That's it. That's the ceiling, period. Somebody comes in with an overrun. Dealt with this at Ford Motor and Caterpillar for years and years and years. You're told you find an offset. You go find where you're taking the money out of the project somewhere else. The fixed cost stays the same. If you ran a private company like we're running this county, Ford Motor would have been out of business a long time ago. So would have Caterpillar. You would build a product that you couldn't compete your competition with. Third, names have to be on stuff that's presented. Somebody has to be accountable. Somebody has to take the responsibility for what comes forward. On that spreadsheet, whoever, it gets reviewed, it goes through all the committees, but at the end of the day, somebody's name goes on that, and they're held accountable. You need to start having accountability in this. There's no business acumen in this process whatsoever. And it shows. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, 11:24, meeting adjourned.